Comicon was this past weekend, and we've got a review of all the major news and all the exciting announcements.
Wide World of Geek.
Hello there, everyone. It's Baka here, and welcome to episode number 38 of the Wide World of Geek, where we look at what's new and newsworthy in the world of geek this week. Now, as I said, Comicon was this past weekend, and it was full of different bits of news and lots of announcements, and lots of nothing. First off, movie news and TV news, if you will, is a little bit of that. This was where the major announcements were. Starting with Marvel Studios. They had a very rich panel, and this was a panel that started off with a bang, possibly the biggest bang of Comic-Con. It started with the lights going out and you hearing Tom Hiddleston's voice as Loki. The lights slowly raised and he's standing there in front of the crowd in Hall H, dressed in full Loki costume, in character, and he starts speaking to the crowd as though they are his new worshippers, new minions, that he has won, that they are his now, and the crowd ate it up. They chanted Loki. They hung on every word he said, and you could tell there were times where he was trying hard not to break character, where he was trying not to laugh. He pulled it off beautifully. It was a great way to open up this panel, and as he left, they started bringing out the casts and directors and writers of various movies. Now, one of the first ones to come out was the cast for Captain America Winter Soldier. And the big news from this was not that Bucky Barnes was coming back as the Winter Soldier, because that's old news. What we found out was the fact that the Black Widow, played by Scarlett Johansson, will be playing a very major role in this movie. That it is more going to be about 50-50 between Captain America and Black Widow, as opposed to Captain America the First Avenger, which was all about Cap. This is, I almost want to call it a buddy cop movie. And it's going to follow the, if you want to call it, the adventures of Captain America and Black Widow as they discover that Bucky Barnes is back as the Winter Soldier. They have to deal with that. And this makes perfect sense for any of you who have read the Captain America comics where they bring back the Winter Soldier. You find out that Natasha Romanoff, the Black Widow, and the Winter Soldier had a relationship while he was under the control of the Soviet Union. So that is making this upcoming movie even more exciting. Aside from the fact that we now get the Falcon in there, and we know that Samuel L. Jackson's going to be playing a good-sized role. So that's pretty cool. Now, the second thing to come up was the Guardians of the Galaxy. And they had the cast come out, at least the cast that we know of so far. We found out that Lee Pace from the show Pushing Daisies, also from the Hobbit movies and Lord of the Ring movies, will be playing Ronan the Accuser, which to me is a little confusing because he's a very thin man and Ronan is a very large guy, and so far he hasn't really bulked up for the role. So I don't know how much of that's going to be CG and how much is just he's going to look different than the comics. But one of the coolest things that had to do with that was they showed new concept art. They showed a digital painted version of what the characters are going to look like in costume. And it's fairly faithful to the comics. Zoe Saldana in green as Gamora. Dave Bautista all green and kind of roided out as Drax the Destroyer. But what was really nice is we got to see pretty much what Groot and Rocket Raccoon are going to look like. They're going to be CG because it's a giant walking, kind of talking tree and a talking raccoon with a dirty mouth. So that was really interesting to me. In a little TV news, the Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. pilot was shown to a select audience, and everyone who came out of that had nothing but glowing reviews. And these are fans. These aren't, Metacritic people or Rotten Tomatoes type people. They're not movie reviewers. These are fans that got to see this pilot, and they loved it, which to me brings even more hope. I already thought this movie was probably going to be awesome, but this just makes it seem like it's going to be 10 times cooler. Now, probably the biggest news to come out of the Marvel panel, though, was at the very end when everyone had been ushered off stage. Chris Hardwick and the head of Marvel Studios brought one more person out to give an announcement, and that person was Joss Whedon. And his announcement was really simple. He said, just look at this footage, or just look up here at the screen. And what they showed was an icon for Avengers 2, or a logo for Avengers 2. And it will be called Avengers: The Age of Ultron. Now what they said is this will not be a retelling of the recent comic book story Age of Ultron, but that it will deal specifically with the character Ultron as the main villain of Avengers 2. Now, we'd all thought that Thanos was going to be the villain of Avengers 2. Turns out he might be the main villain of Guardians of the Galaxy. He might be the setup for Avengers 3 or for Guardians of the Galaxy 2, if that comes to pass. We'll see what happens. Now, the Fox movie panel dealt with The Wolverine and Days of Future Past, and honestly, not that much new was said about The Wolverine. We've gotten a lot of press about that lately. We've gotten a lot of trailers and TV spots, and it's coming up. So they've hyped it as much as they can. But X-Men Days of Future Past was the main focus of this panel. And what was really cool is they brought out everybody. They brought out the old castmates of the X-Men movies that will be appearing in Days of Future Past. They brought out the X-Men First Class castmates. So you got to see James McAvoy and Patrick Stewart sitting next to each other. You got to see Michael Fassbender and Ian McKellen sitting next to each other as, young and old Professor X, young and old Magneto. And we got some, aside from them showing footage that apparently had a very faithful translation of the character Blink, we got a very important piece of information about the storyline, and that's primarily Wolverine's role in everything, and to an extent Kitty Pryde's role. DC Entertainment, they didn't have that much to say, but what they did was they did have Zack Snyder and, don't quote me on this, but possibly Christopher Nolan come out and talk about the fact that Man of Steel is going to have a sequel. And here's the big news about that. It is going to be a Superman-Batman movie. They had actor Henry Lennox come out and read a quote from Batman: The Dark Knight Returns of Batman and Clark talking to each other about how it's all just gonna end. And they have said that while The Dark Knight Returns will be an inspiration for this movie, it will not be what this movie is about. But here's why this is important. Fans have been clamoring for years for a Batman-Superman team-up, live-action team-up. Smallville, for the 9 or 10 seasons that it was on TV, they wanted Batman to show up. They brought in Bart Allen, they brought in Cyborg, they brought in Aquaman, Green Arrow, but they did not bring in Batman. Why not? They're all Warner Brothers properties. They could have easily done it. It would have been huge. last season of Smallville. Have a just starting out Batman with a just starting out Blur, Superman, whatever you want to call him. They didn't do it. The Batman movies have made no mention of Superman even existing. Man of Steel didn't make any mention of Batman existing. So now they're finally going to merge these two franchises, and hopefully this will be what leads us into a Justice League movie, which they kind of announced a Justice League movie for 2016. We'll see. They have to recast Batman because Christian Bale's not going to be playing him again. Henry Cavill will be reprising his role as Superman. I have hope for this movie, but I am also a little wary. We'll see. Hopefully it will be awesome. Now the comic book news for Comicon. There wasn't much of any. Really all that the major companies did was rehash what they'd already announced. They talked about storylines and events like Infinity, X-Men Battle of the Atom, Trinity War. They didn't give any big announcements about these. They didn't announce anything that big. They talked about the Hunger storyline in the Ultimate Universe, and they announced what was coming after that, which is called Cataclysm, which they call the Ultimate's Last Stand, which that could be big, but they've already done something like that with Ultimatum, where they killed off half the Ultimate Universe, if not more. So comic book news was a little lacking for something called Comicon. It should have been called MovieCon. So that's where there's a little bitter pill to swallow. Now, I had some personal favorite things that I've gotten to witness secondhand through the internet that I thought were really cool. The first was Adam Savage from Mythbusters dressed up as Admiral Akbar from Star Wars and walked the convention floor one day, and his headpiece was an authentic mold from the original Star Wars movies, so it was very, very accurate to being Admiral Akbar. His costume, however, was a classic maritime Admiral Nelson costume. So it was truly Admiral Akbar. Another thing he did was, on another day, he organized a flash mob of all these Adam Savage lookalikes. They all had like foam goatees and thermo vacuum formed cowboy hats just like Adam Savage's, and they did what flash mobs do. It looked really hilarious. One of the other things I really enjoyed seeing was Wired Magazine's giant battle mech cosplay. This was a motorized, sensor sensitive, if that's even a phrase, suit that looked exactly like a robot. I mean, it had voice modulation so that the person inside could actually answer what people would say to it, but it would sound like this robot every time it moved. It had very pneumatic, robotic noises that went along with it. It had multiple arms and cannons, and everything moved on it. It was really cool looking. I loved watching the video of Tom Hiddleston come out as Loki. Along with that, in the Sony panel, Andrew Garfield came onto stage for the Amazing Spider-Man 2 panel in his Amazing Spider-Man 2 gear, and he was in character. This is very reminiscent of last year's Comic-Con, where he came out in a really cheesy Spider-Man costume to ask a question, and then to reveal that it was actually him. He did end up coming back out in street clothes, but you could tell he had the Spider-Man costume on underneath. It was kind of great. They've showed pictures of of props from Guardians of the Galaxy, that you can finally see what Star-Lord's helmet is going to look like, which everyone was like, oh no, are they not going to have the helmet? Is it just going to be his face the whole time? No, there's a helmet, and oh, it's sweet. You get to see Gamora's blades, which are a little shorter than I would have expected, but I'm sure they'll be fine. And the last thing, personally, that I want to talk about was Wootstock 5.0. Wootstock is a festival, a comedy nerd festival that goes on this year simultaneously with Comicon, but it usually happens at over multiple days in maybe a couple different cities. This one was in San Diego, and Wootstock is what they call 3 hours of nerdy greatness that was created by Adam Savage, Will Wheaton, and Paul and Storm. Now, what was great about this year's one was when Paul and Storm took the stage to sing their song Write Like the Wind, which is a song imploring George R. Martin to write faster. He's got 2 books left to finish, and they don't want to hold up the HBO show. They don't want him to die before the books are finished. George R. Martin came out on stage, took Storm's guitar, threw it down on the ground, and then stumped it to little bits. And while menacing Paul and Storm with it, Neil Gaiman, the great Neil Gaiman, came out on stage and ridiculed Paul and Storm for how they have treated George R. Martin. It was absolutely hilarious. Go check it out. It's on... You should be able to find it on IO9, on YouTube. Multiple places have put things up. It's great. So that's going to do it for this week's edition of the Wide World of Geek. Now, this Friday, the Bacchus Top 5 will be back. I'm not going to tell you what the top 5 is, though, because that would ruin the surprise. I will tell you that the top 5 will have a much more active appearance than the first one did. So we'll have some video, we'll have some images, but we'll have some music going with it. It should be pretty cool. Next week will either be a top 5 again, or it will be the beginning of the new comic book show. But I won't know until I've had some time. I'm working on a backdrop for that and working to figure out really what I'm going to be saying for the first one. I think I know because I've been going over an idea a lot lately. So we'll see. But until Friday's top 5, this is Bach, and I'll see you guys later. Bye.